Hello and welcome to the next episode. Today I'm going to cover the Olympic Stadium, or the Olympiastadion, one of those places in Berlin that is just absolutely dripping, oozing with history, and a place that I find endlessly fascinating. And sadly, a place I can't actually bring people on my tours because they only allow their own internal guides, which totally makes sense, but it means that to tell you all about it, I have to use the power of video on the internet. Now, when it comes to the Olympiastadion, we, of course, have to talk about the 1936 Olympics. That's why the place is built. With this video, I'm going to, of course, talk about that, but actually just do a bit of an overview of the whole sweep of the history at the place, actually. Loads of little stories that I find interesting. First among them being, it's not the original stadium in that location. Otto Marsch, the architect, he designed the Deutsches Stadion that was opened there in 1913, opened by the last Kaiser of Germany, Wilhelm II, for the 1916 Olympics, which, didn't happen. Not so much running in circles and throwing javelins and going swimming to compete when it comes to 1916. Of course, 1 year after the Deutsches Stadion was opened, World War I began. And so, Berlin has a long cursed history of the Olympics. Actually, when World War I began, any British or British associated, meaning British Empire citizens in Germany were arrested, at least men were. Elderly and women and children, they were cast out of the country. Men were locked up so that they couldn't fight. And one of them was a man named Harry Edward, born in Berlin to a German mother and a Dominican father. And because he was tangentially British, I suppose, he was locked up. Now, he was actually going to be one of the athletes that would compete for Germany in 1916. Instead, he doesn't just end up in war, he ends up in prison. So actually, when he does compete in the Olympics in 1920, it's for Britain. He wins 2 bronze medals and actually becomes the first black Olympic medal winner for Britain. And of course, when we're in the 1920s, the First World War is over, the Weimar Republic is getting into full swing, facing inflation at this point. Hyperinflation is coming, and it's just one of many problems that's going to beset the Weimar Republic. And there were no German medal winners in 1920 or in 1924 because, Germany was seen as the country to be blamed for the First World War. Germany was not invited to participate in global sports, at least for those 2 Olympics. They would then compete in 1928 and 1932. And actually, it was in 1931 that the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, decided to award the Olympics to Berlin. The idea being that it would be good to bolster the economy of a returned Germany, of a democratic Germany, of a Germany that was reintegrating itself into, world society. That means that when the Nazis came to power a couple of years later, in 1933, they inherited the Olympics. And take a look at Hitler, Goebbels, Goering, Himmler. They don't exactly strike you as the athletic type. Hitler had really not much interest in sport at all. It's worth noting that when he grew up, when he was young, public sports were really in their infancy. They weren't the kind of large phenomenon that they are today. That's something that really grew in the Weimar years. And so when he comes to power, he looks at the Olympic message, this message of peace and cooperation, and he's like, this is the opposite of what I stand for. And so he toys with cancelling the 1936 Olympics, but it is Joseph Goebbels, propaganda minister, who sees the value in it. This is a chance to show off. The whole world will be here with their journalists, cameras and microphones. They will get to step inside of the new Germany that we are creating. and they will see it for themselves, and they will be impressed, and they will go home and they will tell friends and family and politicians and whoever else, I've been there, I've met them, it's not as bad as you've heard. It's the kick up the arse that the country needs. And yeah, spoiler alert, the propaganda charm offensive during the couple of weeks of the 1936 Olympics, it absolutely works. So Adolf Hitler goes to visit the construction site for the new stadium. Now, if you remember, Otto Marsch, he's the architect behind the original stadium. He actually died the same year that it opened under Wilhelm II, and then his two sons took over his architectural firm. And it was one of his sons, Werner Marsch, who would then come to design the new Olympic Stadium. And when Hitler arrives, he sees what this guy is building. Glass and steel modern stadium. Think of the Bauhaus school. Think of, the modern architecture, the contemporary architecture of the 20s in Germany, particularly in Berlin. Marsch wanted to build something like that, and Hitler got pretty upset about it. This was not what he wanted. He wanted, well, what he got, what we have today. What I call Nazi architecture meets the Colosseum. The Nazis like to steep themselves in historic architecture to make themselves look and feel like a movement that was connected to history, a movement that was somehow important. So as far as I can tell, Speer was brought in, Albert Speer, and his favorite material, limestone, was added, German limestone from Franconia in northern Bavaria. When we think about the construction of the stadium, that's also part of the story, part of the propaganda. The Nazis were obsessed with what they called Gleichschaltung, synchronicity, doing away with Germany's very confusing government system with all of its different states and territories and whatever, and whipping them into shape, into one single central authority that they could control. And this meant getting rid of the trade unions and replacing them with a couple of institutions of their own. Through these institutions, the Nazis would borrow some time from some young men to get them to do some work, to get them to build the new empire, the new country. And the Olympic Stadium is part of that. The idea is that the whole thing was built by Aryan Germans, and they were creating this great big stadium that would impress everybody. And not just the stadium, the whole Olympic grounds. It includes a hockey stadium, amphitheater, swimming pool, of course, training centers. Actually, part of the training center would become, as far as I'm aware, the head of the British military occupation during the Cold War. But yeah, it's a big deal. And when you ignore the horrendous politics and immorality of it, impressive. They did a good job. And if you ever are lucky enough to visit the stadium, you'll find out what I mean. When you arrive, you have these two great big columns, the Olympic rings between them. And when you walk through there, and you walk through the first little archway that you see, and you enter this massive stadium that's actually recessed. So from the outside, it looks, oh, okay, quite impressive, quite pretty, but not huge. And you walk inside and it's like, wow, feels like it's twice the size. And over at the far end from where you walk in is the marathon gate, where the Olympic flame would stand. And every 4 years when the Olympics comes around, you hear the same thing, right? The running of the torch, that was actually invented in 1936. It was invented by the Nazis, and it's true. In the Reich Ministry for Sport was a man named Karl Diem, and he came up with the idea of running the torch 3,075 kilometers, that's about 1,900 miles, from Olympia in Greece northwards through Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Austria, I think is in there, Czechoslovakia, and into Germany. And 3,075 kilometers is a hell of a long way for one man to run. And so they decided that it would be a torch relay. And so, what better to do than have 3,075 athletes? The final runner was a man named Fritz Schilgen. And Schilgen, he was a talented athlete, not super talented, actually not part of the German Olympic team, but he was chosen because, well, that final stretch through the city of Berlin, that is the most symbolic, the most important. And so the Nazis, again, thinking of propaganda, wanted to choose somebody who fit their ideals, choose someone who they had decided was of Aryan appearance. And so Fritz Schilgen, who apparently ran ever so gracefully, he was chosen to run that final stretch. And as he entered the stadium, went down onto the running track and up to the other side, he could then light the Olympic torch. And the cauldron is still there. And either side of it, you can actually see the list of medal winners, what they won their medals for. Jesse Owens is right up in the top left. Owens is mentioned twice in the top left for the 100 meters and 200 meters. He would also win gold as part of the 4x100 men's relay team. They actually broke a world record. His three other gold medals were Olympic records. And the famous one is the long jump against the German long jumper Lutz Long, where they go toe-to-toe right to the very last jump, and Owens wins, and the two crash down together on the field in front of Hitler, arm in arm, and Lutz Long got in trouble for that, right? The Nazis most definitely did not like black people either. The simple fact is that there were not many black people in Germany at the time, and so they didn't become a huge feature of their hateful propaganda. Onto the propaganda, actually, during the 2 weeks of the games, the Nazis, they put on a show. You know, think of Weimar Berlin, think of what areas like Friedrichstraße and the Kudamm and Schöneberg, they were famous for cabaret, for neon lights, for wild bars and parties. I mean, these existed all over Berlin, and the Nazis knew that international visitors to Berlin would want to see those things. So you can bet that those things were running. And the music that was being played, swing and jazz, played by black musicians, sometimes from the US actually, who had come to Europe originally because it was more tolerant. Not perfect, I hasten to add, but more tolerant. And the Nazis let this happen too. It's a bit surprising to many people, but they understood what it was to put on a show. In fact, it went further. They took down signs that would say Jews aren't allowed in here or can't do this. They stopped selling some of the more hateful newspapers. They even encouraged, as they were walking around the streets, brown shirts to not wear their uniforms, although there would have been a hell of a lot of brown shirts that were present at the Olympics, lining the route as the flame was run. There was even a little kind of like holiday camp village built next to the Olympic Stadium just for the brown shirts that had come from all over the country to see the games. As for the stadium itself, today it sits around 70,000 people. The capacity at the time was 100,000. Adolf Hitler wanted the largest stadium in the entire world. And I should state that of that 100,000, about 1/3 of the people coming in would be standing. There are reports of 110,000 people showing up and squeezing in to watch the games, to watch Leni Riefenstahl run around, get in the way, shooting her film Olympia. By all accounts, the Olympic Games were a huge success, were a great celebration for the vast majority of people that were involved. They were effective at whitewashing the regime, at least for a little bit. It's hard to calculate what that kind of goodwill would have done, what the effect of it would have done. One thing that most visitors would not have seen during the Olympic Games is Sinti and Roma people, labeled as gypsies by the Nazis. In the weeks before the games, 6,000 of them were removed from their homes and taken to an East Berlin district named Marzahn, where they were made to camp in caravans in a field where there were only 2 bathrooms. They were allowed to leave this place to go and buy food, but only with special coupons rather than with actual money. So stores in the area had been told that they had to accept these, but yeah, these people were not allowed in until, say, 5 p.m., meaning if you go to a bakery at 5 p.m., you get what's left, which often isn't much. This was supposed to be a temporary measure for the games, but this is something that the Nazis actually kept up afterwards. A couple of years later, a lot of the men would be removed from what was effectively at this point a concentration camp. They would be sent to the real, let's say, the proper camps, and later on would mostly be sent to their deaths. There is a monument out there in Marzahn for this, and I have to say it's the kind of place that today is a bit out the way. Most Berliners, I'm guessing, probably don't even know about this place, you know? Let's get beyond 1936. Austria, when the Nazis took that, they viewed it as part of the Reich proper, as part of Germany proper. So effectively, it was part of Germany, as opposed to an occupied territory where different rules, different laws would apply. And curiously, what that means is that Austrian teams would then play in the German Football League. And in 1941, Rapid Vienna would win the league. inside of the Olympic Stadium with their star striker Franz Binder, one of the many football players who supposedly got over 100 recorded career goals. I know that's always a little bit contested. For Austrians, this was seen as something to be proud of, something to be excited about, especially as an effectively occupied territory now during World War II. You have to remember, the majority of Austrians were not Nazis. Certainly there were a lot of Austrians who went along with it, I know, but Austria was de facto invaded. Annexed is the term that is used. So I mentioned World War II. The stadium actually survives pretty well intact. I mean, there's going to be fighting absolutely everywhere, but it's an area comprised of a lot of big open spaces. It's a stupid place to try and defend. And as I mentioned before, they ended up in the British sector. So the Brits would then have control of this area. And what do the Brits love? What do we love? I'm British. The Queen. And so it's actually out the back of the Olympic Stadium at the Maifeld, where you've got this great big bell tower that was rebuilt after the war, where the Brits, in a place that was built for Nazi rallies, would end up having great big parades to celebrate the Queen's birthday. I'm told the largest such parades in the world. So what happens to the Olympic Stadium when the Brits aren't parading about and shouting about how much they love their Queen? Well, you will be shocked to hear that it's used for sports. Wow. When the Bundesliga was formed, well, the DFB, the German football authority, they wanted a West Berlin team in there so that West Berlin, which you may know was entirely inside of East Germany, could feel like a proper part of West Germany. And so they pretty much dragged the most successful West Berlin team into the league, and that was Hertha Berlin. Now, at this time in the Bundesliga, there were strict limits on how much players could be paid. And what this meant is that every team in the league, if they wanted the best players, if they didn't want the best players to leave and go to Italy or England or so, they paid them. They paid them under the table. They gave them extra money. The trick to doing this, of course, is to not get caught. And what do you know? Hertha got caught. And so that meant that they were caught red-handed and they were booted out of the league. And so the Bundesliga is scrabbling. We need another West Berlin team. Who are we going to pick? And they actually ask a team called Tasmania Berlin, many of whose players at the time they were asked were on holiday. And Tasmania, who were like way down the league, 'cause they're not just in the second, they're way down. Amazingly, they said yes. They called their players back from holiday. And what do you know? They are now a top flight team playing against actual top flight teams, which means they're not good. And so Tasmania Berlin in the 1965-66 season just have literally the worst season in Bundesliga history. I'm going to tell you some of the records that they still hold right at the end of this video. They do, during the season, concede more than 100 goals, and their home stadium during the season is the Olympiastadion, and amazingly, the 100th goal is conceded in the Olympiastadion against Eintracht Frankfurt. And the fans, by this point, were used to conceding goals, and so, yeah, they actually had a floral display ready to celebrate this inglorious moment, this abject failure of the club. The club will actually go into financial trouble after this and be reformed in the 70s and do still exist today. They play in the former West Berlin district of Neukölln. As for Hertha, Hertha are, I guess on paper, the most successful Berlin football team. They won the league in 1929 and 1930 off the top of my head. It's been a long time since a Berlin team has won. So when it comes to kind of sporting glory at this stadium, I mean, shortly after the Berlin Wall came down, the most famous East Berlin club, at least today, Union Berlin, they will come over and play Hertha in this celebration, exhibition match, a stadium full of people who thought, how the hell is this even possible? We never thought we would see this day. Then we get into the 2000s and the Olympiastadion changes. I mean, it has this super impressive roof today that is both modern and it blends in with the stadium. It used to have no roof whatsoever, and that's actually from only 2004. When Germany won the rights to host the Men's Football World Cup in 2006, well, the Olympic Stadium It needed renovation, and so it underwent a 4-year renovation, cost millions and millions and millions. And they made a modern stadium out of this historic stadium, but they kept a lot of the original historic details. One thing they never rebuilt, of course, was the Führerloge, the little balcony where Adolf Hitler would sit with his henchmen and watch the games. There is still a VIP section there, but it's smaller. It's in a vastly reduced form. In 2006, of course, in the World Cup, it was Italy who won the cup in the final against France, which means that Berlin's Olympiastadion is home to the infamous Zinedine Zidane headbutt. 2009, there's an athletics championship held inside the stadium, and none other than Usain Bolt ran there and broke the world record for the 100 meters, 9 seconds 58, that still stands today. In 2015, the Champions League final is held in the Olympiastadion, and Messi's Barcelona beat Juventus 3-1. And then we have the Special Olympics held there in 2023. A friend of mine volunteered there and said it was just this amazing positivity, this just wonderful feeling. And that leads us then up to 2024, when England played in the final of the Euros against Spain. Prince William and King Felipe were there, and I got to watch England lose. I wasn't at the stadium for the game, thankfully, because, the score didn't quite go the way I wanted to. But hey, the Olympiastadion, a place that is absolutely, as I say, full of history and is still in use and still making history today, which I think is just absolutely fantastic. So if you are ever in town, if you've never been, it makes for an amazing place to visit. All right, thank you for watching. Before you click goodbye, I want to tell you Tasmania Berlin's awful records, which I'm going to read from my iPad here. All right, let's have a look. So, fewest points in a season, fewest wins in a season, most losses in a season, fewest goals scored in a season with 15, most goals conceded, that's 108, worst goal difference, of course, which is minus 93, the longest winless run with a single Bundesliga season, that is 31 matches, the most matches without scoring in a single season, which is 22, the fewest matches with at least one goal in a season, 12, the fewest goals at home in a season, only 8, and fewest goals away, which is 7. Fewest goals in the opening half of a season and in a closing half of a season. Most goals conceded in the opening half of a season and in the closing half. Just the list goes on. Poor Tasmania Berlin. At this point, you just have to laugh. And of course, there's good reason why it happened, why they ended up there, but I thought it was funny. All right, that's my little bit on the Olympiastadion. I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun. I hope that you drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.